She moved through the hotel restaurant with quiet steps, carrying a small tray in her hands, careful not to bump into anyone. Every evening felt almost the same to her routine, predictable and peaceful in its own way. She did her work calmly, never raising her voice, never complaining, never trying to stand out. People noticed her, but only in the way one notices the gentle sound of a fan in the background. She was there, helpful and steady, but never the center of attention. Most of the other employees talked loudly, shared jokes, and discussed their plans. She listened politely when someone spoke to her, responded with a soft smile, and then returned to her tasks. No one ever asked too much about her life, and she never offered anything. She kept her thoughts tucked inside, as if she had built invisible walls around her heart. Every morning, she arrived earlier than she needed to, not because anyone forced her to, but because she liked the quiet moments before the restaurant filled with noise. The chairs were still stacked, the lights were dim, and the air smelled fresh, like new beginnings. She would walk around slowly, checking the tables, making sure everything looked neat. It made her feel calm, but there was one thing she always noticed, one thing she always tried not to look at for too long. The piano. It sat quietly in the lobby, with an old cover partly draped over it. Dust collected on its edges, and most days, no one touched it. Sometimes a child would press a key while passing by, or a guest would lift the cover for a moment out of curiosity. But no one ever played it properly. She walked past it every single day. And every day, something inside her stirred, a tiny ache she tried to hide. Her eyes always paused on the wooden frame, the keys, the way the sunlight hit it in the morning. But then, just as quickly, she would force her gaze away and pretend it meant nothing. Because she had promised herself never to touch a piano again at work, she was known simply as the quiet one, the one who always helped, the one who never caused problems. And the manager liked her for that reason. She made his job easier. But he never really noticed her as a person. To him, she was just one of the staff, someone who did her tasks without making any noise. He liked making jokes, mostly about silly things. Sometimes they were harmless, sometimes a bit annoying, but people laughed to keep the mood light. She laughed too, even if her smile was small. It was easier that way. That evening, the restaurant was fuller than usual. Guests kept coming, and the kitchen was rushing to keep up. The manager walked around trying to look calm, but everyone could see the stress in his eyes. When things got chaotic, he started joking more, as if laughter could solve everything. He stopped near her table and playfully pointed toward the lobby. "You know," he said loudly, hoping his voice would carry to other staff members, "if you play that piano tonight, I'll resign on the spot." A couple of waiters burst out laughing. Even guests nearby smiled, assuming he was just trying to be funny. She looked at him with a small, polite smile. She didn't say yes or no. She didn't react with shock or amusement. She just nodded lightly and walked away to deliver food to a table. Her calm reaction made him shrug and laugh again. "See? She can't even imagine touching that thing," he joked to the others. But deep down, she felt the words settle inside her chest. Not because she believed them, but because the piano was not a joke to her. It was a part of her life she had locked away. And hearing someone laugh about it made something old and painful stirred out. As the night went on, guests continued arriving. The atmosphere grew louder, filled with conversations, clinking glasses, and the constant sound of footsteps. She kept working with the same soft focus. But every time she passed the lobby, the piano seemed to glow a little brighter in her peripheral vision. In the middle of the rush, she paused for a moment, watching a small child tapping randomly on the keys while waiting for his parents. The soft, unformed notes floated into the air like incomplete sentences. She felt her chest tighten, remembering a time when those same sounds meant joy, practice, and endless dreams. She quickly turned away before the memories could take root. Later, when the dinner rush calmed, she stood behind the counter wrapping napkins around cutlery. The manager walked by again, still chuckling at his joke from earlier. "You know, I think the piano misses you," he teased. "Maybe it wants to hear you try a note or two." She looked at him for a moment, expression unreadable. He interpreted her silence as shyness, the same way he always did. But her silence wasn't shyness. It was protection. The truth was, she had once lived a life completely different from this one. A life filled with stages, bright lights, and applause. A life that felt too heavy, too painful to revisit. She had walked away from that world for reasons she never shared. Not with friends, not with coworkers, not with anyone got to them. She was just a quiet worker with a gentle smile. To herself, she was someone who carried a past she wasn't ready to face. As she continued her tasks, she overheard two waiters speaking behind her. "She's nice," one whispered, "but I can't imagine her playing anything. She's too quiet for that." "Yeah," the other replied. "She probably never touched an instrument in her life." The manager's joke was perfect. They laughed and walked away. She didn't turn around. She didn't correct them. She didn't tell them that the piano was once like a second home to her. She didn't say that each key carried memories she wasn't ready to relive. Instead, she finished wrapping the cutlery and placed it neatly in a basket. As closing time neared, the restaurant's bustle softened into a calm hum. Guests lingered over their final drinks. Soft music played through the speakers. She moved to clean a table near the lobby, and again her eyes fell on the piano. The light from the chandelier above gave it a warm glow, almost inviting. She stepped closer without thinking, drawn in by something she could not explain. Her fingers twitched slightly, remembering the movements they had repeated thousands of times in the past. But she stopped herself and stepped back. Not now. Not ever. She reminded herself. She picked up her cleaning cloth and tried to focus on her work. But her heart was beating a little faster now, as if waking up after a long sleep. The quiet inside her didn't feel as calm as before, felt restless. Even after she finished her shift and walked toward the exit, she paused one last time near the piano. She stared at it gently, almost lovingly, as if silently apologizing to it. She touched the wooden frame with the back of her fingers only for a second, then pulled away quickly. The world she had left behind was still inside her, and she knew, deep down, that someday something would force her to face it again. But for now, she walked out the hotel's glass doors, believing that her past would stay buried forever. The next evening felt heavier than usual inside the hotel. People walked faster, the kitchen sounded louder, and the manager's voice carried across the room more sharply than before. It was one of those nights when everything seemed slightly out of place, as if everyone was waiting for something unexpected to happen. She arrived at her usual time, carrying the same calm expression she always wore. But even she sensed a strange tension in the air. She tied her apron, greeted a couple of coworkers, and moved quietly to her first task of the evening. The restaurant was already filling up. A line of guests waited at the entrance, talking among themselves while the staff rushed around trying to make space. The manager stood in the middle of it all, holding his tablet and tapping faster than normal. He wasn't in a bad mood, but he was clearly stressed. And when he got stressed, he talked more, joked more, and tried harder than usual to hide the pressure he felt. She went from table to table, placing cutlery, checking chairs, and making sure everything looked neat. Her movements were steady, but her thoughts wandered more than usual. The previous night still lingered in her mind, the manager's joke, the laughter, and the way everyone reacted, as if the idea of her touching a piano was impossible. She had brushed it off with a simple smile, just like she brushed off everything she didn't want to reveal. But deep inside, The joke had touched something she had tried for years to keep buried. And tonight, that feeling returned the moment she walked past the lobby. There it was again, the piano, sitting under the warm lights, silent, untouched, waiting. She slowed her steps without meaning to, her eyes pulled toward it like a magnet. It felt as if the piano was looking back at her, patient, familiar, almost like an old friend she had abandoned. Before the feeling could deepen, she forced her gaze away and continued to the restaurant. The evening grew busier by the minute. Guests asked for extra napkins, drinks, and menu suggestions. The kitchen bell rang constantly, signaling orders ready to be served. She carried plates carefully, weaving through the crowded room with quiet precision. But the manager was everywhere, checking tables, talking loudly, and trying to keep the mood light with jokes that didn't really land. At one point, he approached her with a smile that stretched a little too wide. "Remember what I said yesterday?" he asked loudly, making sure other staff members heard. "If you play the piano, I'll resign right here." A few waiters laughed again, repeating the joke among themselves. Someone even added, "If she plays, the whole hotel will shut down because nobody will believe it." She gave the same soft, polite smile as before. Not too warm, not too cold. Just enough to show she wasn't offended. But deep down, she felt a small pinch inside her chest. She continued working, refusing to let the joke bother her. But as she carried a tray past a table near the lobby, she heard the familiar sound of a piano key being pressed. A little girl was standing there, poking at the keys with curiosity. She watched quietly for a moment, the sound pulling memories forward like a tide. That single, scattered note felt like a whisper from her past. She quickly turned away and continued toward the restaurant. The manager, meanwhile, grew even more talkative. His stress made him louder. When one guest asked if the hotel had live music, he said with exaggerated humor, "Only if she decides to surprise us one day. But trust me, that will never happen." More laughter followed. She didn't react, but inside, something unsettled her. Not because the manager's words hurt. She had seen worse, heard worse. It was because the idea of playing again, even as a joke, tugged at a part of her she thought she had locked away forever. Time passed, and the restaurant reached its peak hour. The air felt thick with noise and movement. She worked steadily, delivering dishes, refilling glasses, and keeping her focus sharp. But the atmosphere was shifting again. Guests were starting to complain, not about the food or service, but about something else. One man at a large table near the back waved the manager over. "Isn't there supposed to be music?" The man asked. "The lobby feels too quiet for such a big hotel." The manager cleared his throat. "We usually have background music, sir, but live performance is, unavailable tonight." The man muttered, clearly disappointed. Another table joined in, asking if the hotel had anyone who could play even simple tunes. Something soft, something relaxing, anything other than the silence. The manager tried to lighten the moment again, pointing toward her. "Well, she can play. But the day she does, I might as well hand over my keys and quit." The guests chuckled politely, assuming it was just another harmless joke. But the wealthy man at the back didn't laugh. He studied her carefully. Something in her posture, the quiet way she worked, the strange calmness around her, none of it matched the manager's teasing tone. His eyes followed her as she moved around the room. He didn't know why, but he felt there was more to her than what the manager believed. Later, the staff gathered near the kitchen entrance to regroup for the next wave of orders. She was wiping her hands with a towel when she noticed the wealthy man walking toward her slowly. He stopped a polite distance away, smiling kindly. "Excuse me," he said gently. "Would you be willing to play something for us tonight? Just a simple piece. I think it would make the evening unforgettable." She froze, her hands stilled, her breath paused. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Her eyes flickered toward the piano, then back at him. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Before she could gather herself, the manager hurried over with a nervous laugh. "Oh no, sir, she's just being shy. She definitely can't play." The wealthy guest didn't look away from her. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "I feel like she can." She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. The staff watched the scene with curiosity. A few whispered to each other, amused by the idea that a quiet worker like her could ever sit at a piano. The manager clapped his hands, lightly as if to end the conversation. "She won't do it. Trust me." But the wealthy guest still didn't move. "Let her answer for herself," he said. Everyone turned to her. The room felt still, even with the noise around them. She felt dozens of eyes waiting for her response, some curious, some doubtful, some amused. For years, she had avoided this moment. For years, she had built her life carefully, so she wouldn't have to face anything that reminded her of the world she left behind. But tonight, something was different. Maybe it was the way the man asked gently. Maybe it was the piano calling out to her again and again. Maybe it was the exhaustion of hiding a part of herself for so long. Whatever the reason, she felt something shift inside her. Without a word. She set down the towel. Her feet moved on their own, step by step, quietly toward the piano. The staff stared. Stunned. The manager blinked rapidly. Unsure whether to laugh or protest, the wealthy guest smiled softly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. She walked through the lobby, each step feeling heavier than the last. She could hear her own breath, the beating of her heart, the distant sound of guests whispering behind her. When she reached the piano, she stopped. Her fingers trembled. Her past and present collided inside her chest. Then, with the quietest movement, she lifted the cover from the keys. The air around her shifted. The restaurant grew still. People stopped talking. She pulled out the bench slowly and sat down. Her fingertips hovered over the keys. And for the first time in years, she let herself feel the weight of who she used to be. She sat in front of the piano, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes on her. The room didn't go silent in an instant, but it faded slowly, as if everyone realized something unusual was happening and leaned in to witness it. The soft clinking of dishes lowered, conversations thinned, and even the distant noise from the kitchen felt like it drifted into the background. The piano keys lay before her like a familiar road she once knew by heart. Her fingers hovered above them, trembling not because she lacked skill, but because she had spent so many years avoiding this exact moment. Memories she had tried to bury rose quietly inside her like small waves. The warm lights above her made the piano glow, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to truly see it, not as a reminder of pain, but as a part of herself she had abandoned. Behind her, the staff exchanged confused looks. No one said a word. The manager's playful confidence faded from his face and was replaced by uncertainty. He stood stiff, as if unsure whether to stop her or pretend he never made the joke in the first place. The wealthy guest, the one who had gently asked her to play, watched with calm anticipation. His eyes carried no judgment, no pressure, only encouragement. It was as if he already knew she wasn't ordinary. She took a slow breath. Her hands lowered toward the keys, but she didn't play, not yet. She closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the cool surface of the keys beneath her fingertips. She remembered mornings filled with music, long hours of practice, competitions, applause, travel, exhaustion, and the heavy expectations placed on her back. She remembered the pressure that once pushed her so far. She had promised herself she would never return to this world. But she also remembered the joy the way the music once felt like a friend, the way it filled empty rooms with warmth, the way it made her feel alive. Her fingers finally pressed the first key. A single, soft note floated into the air. It was gentle, almost like a whisper, but it carried enough emotion for the closest guests to pause mid-sentence. She waited a heartbeat, letting the sound fade naturally. Then she pressed another key, and another. The melody slowly took shape, simple at first, as if she were testing the waters. Her hands moved carefully but steadily, and each note blended with the next like they had been waiting all along. The wealthy guest smiled. The other guests leaned forward, and her coworkers, who had always known her as the quiet, ordinary employee, stared with wide eyes. The manager's jaw tightened slightly, and he forced a shaky laugh. "Wow, she's actually trying," he muttered under his breath, but his voice lacked confidence. He wasn't laughing anymore. She continued playing, her movements more relaxed with each passing second. The music grew fuller, deeper, and richer. Her fingers ran across the keys with ease, shaping each sound with delicate accuracy. It wasn't just talent, it was mastery. The kind that only comes from years of dedication. Within a minute, the melody transformed into something breathtaking. Conversations in the restaurant faded completely as guests turned their chairs to face her. People walking through the lobby stopped in their tracks. Some even pulled out their phones, recording the moment. Still, she didn't look up. She let herself fall into the music, like stepping into a warm memory she had avoided for too long. Her heart softened, her posture eased, and her fingers began to move with natural confidence. It was as if the piano awakened a part of her that had been sleeping for years. The wealthy man stood quietly near the lobby, watching her with a calm expression. He didn't look surprised. If anything, he looked relieved, like he had trusted his instinct, and it had proven right. The staff members weren't sure what to feel. Some exchanged stunned glances. Others whispered to each other, "Is this really her? How does she know how to play like that? This is unbelievable." The manager looked the most shocked of all. His face shifted through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, embarrassment, and maybe even regret. He couldn't take his eyes off her, but he also couldn't accept what he was seeing. She played for a long moment, letting the instrument guide her. When she reached the final notes of the piece, her fingers slowed, dancing gently across the keys until the final sound faded into the warm air. There was silence. A full, deep silence. Then applause exploded across the lobby. Guests clapped loudly. Some even stood up. A few whistled in admiration. Phones were still recording, capturing the moment from every angle. She sat there, breathing softly, her hands resting on her lap. She didn't turn around immediately. She didn't smile or bow. She simply sat still, letting the applause wash over her in a gentle wave. It felt strange, familiar, but distant, comforting, but overwhelming. The wealthy guest stepped closer and clapped warmly. "That was beautiful," he said softly, loud enough for her to hear, but not too loud to draw attention. "Thank you for sharing that." She looked up at him slowly, her eyes tired but calm. She gave him a small nod, appreciating his gentle words. But the manager stepped forward too, looking completely unsettled. You never told us you could do that," he said, his voice shaky. He tried to laugh, but it came out awkward. "All this time? And you never said anything?" She didn't respond at first. She didn't owe him an explanation, and she wasn't sure she could explain even if she tried. But the questions didn't stop. A small crowd gathered around her. "Where did you learn to play like that? Were you trained professionally? Do you perform somewhere else?" She lowered her eyes again, overwhelmed by the attention. She had spent years avoiding exactly this moment. Yet now she found herself at the center of a circle of admiration. Before she could answer, The wealthy guest gently raised his hand, asking the others to give her space. His tone was polite but firm. "Let her breathe," he said. The crowd quieted. Her coworkers stepped back slightly, giving her room, though they continued staring in disbelief. She stood up slowly from the bench. Her legs felt slightly weak, not from fear, but from the emotional weight of what just happened. The wealthy guest approached her again. "You don't have to answer questions tonight," he told her kindly. "But I do hope you play again someday. Not for anyone else, but for yourself." His words softened her expression. She nodded again, but before she could respond, the manager stepped forward once more. "Wait," he said quickly. "Seriously, where did you learn to play like that? You're not just a beginner. That was professional level." She looked at him quietly. The manager's amusement was gone completely, replaced by genuine confusion and shock. She opened her mouth, paused, then finally spoke. "It was a long time ago," she said softly. "But I stopped." Her voice was steady, but there was a hint of sadness in it that made even the manager stay silent. "Stopped?" he repeated. "Why?" She shook her head gently. "Some things are hard to explain." He didn't push further. Guests returned to their tables slowly, but many kept glancing back at her, still amazed by what they had witnessed. Some whispered excitedly among themselves. Others showed their recordings to their friends. She stepped away from the piano, her heart still racing, but her mind strangely calm. Playing again had opened something inside her, something she wasn't sure she was ready to face, but something she could no longer avoid. As she walked back toward the restaurant, the wealthy guest gave her one last respectful nod before returning to his table. Her coworkers parted to make space for her, watching her like they were seeing her for the first time. She placed her hand on a clean table to steady herself. For the first time in years, she felt the old spark, the quiet, powerful feeling of belonging to music. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. Everyone else at the hotel thought tonight was just a surprising moment. But for her, it was the moment she unknowingly stepped back into the world she had run from, and nothing would be the same again. The afternoon sun poured through the tall glass windows of the hotel lobby, giving everything a warm and golden glow. She walked in slowly, tired from the long morning she had already spent working. But there was also a quiet hope inside her chest, because she had been waiting for this moment. For many days, she had felt like something big was shifting around her, as if the world was giving her small signs that her life was about to change in a way she hadn't planned, but maybe needed. Now that she was stepping back inside the place where she once felt invisible, she hoped that whatever happened next would finally make sense. The lobby was busy as usual. Guests checked in, staff rushed around the front desk, and soft music played from the speakers. She noticed the familiar faces who looked at her differently, now not with judgment, but with curiosity, respect, and in some cases, even guilt. People whispered when she passed. They didn't think she could hear them, but she did. Everyone remembered what happened that night in the ballroom, the night when she touched the piano, and the entire room froze, shocked by what they heard. That moment had spread through the hotel like fire. Now, she wasn't just another staff member in a simple uniform. She was the girl who played like someone from a distant world. She walked toward the staff hallway, but before she could take 2 steps, someone called her from behind. She turned and saw the manager walking briskly toward her. His expression was mixed, part serious, part unsure, almost like he wanted to say something important, but didn't know how to begin. He stopped in front of her, straightened his shirt, and said, "Can we talk?" She nodded politely. "Yes, of course." The manager gestured for her to walk with him toward the side area, where a few chairs were placed. The corner was slightly quiet, away from the crowd. They sat down, but she could feel his hesitation. It was strange, because he had always spoken with confidence, almost too much at times. Yet now he looked like he was walking on fragile ground. "I want to talk about what happened the other day," he began, keeping his voice low. "Everyone is still talking about your performance. I don't think I've seen anything spread this fast among the staff. Even guests asked me about it." She stayed silent, unsure what he expected from her. "I also want to." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I want to apologize for the way I behaved. I said things I shouldn't have. I underestimated you, and I made it sound like you were not capable of anything beyond this job. That was wrong of me." His words were simple, but they humbled him. She could tell he meant them sincerely. She gave a small nod. "Thank you. I appreciate that." The manager let out a soft breath, as if relieved. "I also want you to know that upper management heard about what happened. They want to speak with you soon. It could be something positive." He leaned back slightly. Maybe something unexpected. She didn't know how to respond. She had never been called by upper management before, and she wasn't sure if she should feel excited or scared. Before she could ask any questions, one of the receptionists approached them, looking nervous. "Sorry to interrupt, but we need you both in the main hall. There's a situation." The manager stood up quickly. "What kind of situation?" "A guest is asking for live music. They're refusing to start their event without it. The pianist we booked got stuck in traffic. They're insisting someone else plays for a while until he arrives." The manager rubbed his forehead. "And why are you calling me? I'm not a musician." Then he paused and glanced down at her. The realization hit him. The receptionist followed his eyes and blinked. "Oh?" The three of them stood there in silence for a moment. The manager slowly sighed. "I think they want you to handle it." Her heart skipped. "Me?" The receptionist nodded. Word spread. "They heard you played before, and they want you." It felt strange. Just days ago, she was invisible. Now people were requesting her. "You don't have to do it if you don't want to," the manager said softly. "No pressure from me." But she didn't need to think long. Something inside her had started waking up since the night she first played. She felt like she was remembering a part of her life she had buried for too long. Maybe this was her chance to understand why life had brought her back to music. She drew a slow breath and said, "I'll do it." The manager nodded and gestured toward the hall. They walked together, and with each step, her heartbeat grew louder. She tried to calm her nerves, but her hands trembled slightly. She kept telling herself she wasn't performing for fame or recognition. She was just helping, just filling in until the real pianist arrived. When they entered the hall, she saw that it was beautifully decorated with soft white lights. The guests were dressed elegantly, and a large grand piano sat on the stage. It looked larger than the one she played in the ballroom. The room buzzed with conversation, but when people noticed her walking toward the piano, some whispered, "Is that her? The girl from the other night? I heard she plays like a professional." She ignored the comments, trying not to feel overwhelmed. She walked up the steps slowly and reached the piano. Her fingers brushed across the smooth surface, and the familiar feeling sent a wave of memories through her. Sitting down, she took a moment to breathe. All eyes were on her now. She placed her hands on the keys. The room went silent. Then she began to play. This time, she didn't play out of fear or pressure. She played because something inside her wanted to speak. She played softly at first, letting the notes float in the air like gentle feathers. Then she grew bolder, adding emotion, depth, and stories hidden in her heart. The melody touched the corners of the hall, making people pause mid-sentence and turn their heads. A couple near the front stopped arguing and simply listened. A child who had been running around sat down quietly. Even the servers serving drinks slowed. Their movements. Her music filled the entire hall. The notes weren't just sound. They were pieces of her life that she had never told anyone. They carried her struggles, her quiet victories, the moments she felt lost, and the moments she found herself again. She played like she was finally reclaiming her voice. As she continued, she noticed someone standing at the entrance. It was a woman she recognized from upper management, the same woman who rarely spoke to staff directly. She stood still, watching her with wide eyes, clearly surprised and impressed, but she kept playing. This wasn't the time to stop. When she reached the final note, her fingers hovered above the keys for a moment before she slowly let them rest. The room stayed silent, as if everyone needed a moment to return to reality. Then the applause began. It wasn't loud at first. It started with one person clapping softly, then another, then more, until the entire hall filled with warm, grateful applause. She felt her eyes sting with emotion, not because of the attention, but because it felt like she had finally been seen for who she truly was. When she stood up, the manager looked at her with disbelief. That was incredible. She smiled shyly. Thank you. The woman from upper management approached her. Her expression was serious, but there was a spark of excitement in her eyes. We need to talk, she said gently. Something in her tone made the young woman feel a shiver of anticipation. Talk about what? She asked quietly. The woman gave a small, meaningful smile. About your future here? The moment she stepped out of the hall, her legs felt light, almost shaky, as if the applause from the guests was still echoing inside her. She walked slowly through the corridor, trying to steady her breath. So much had happened in just a few hours that her mind needed time to catch up. One moment she was a simple staff member. The next she was sitting at a grand piano, playing in front of people in expensive clothes. Everything felt unreal, yet strangely right, as if this was the direction her life was always meant to take. The hallway was quiet compared to the buzzing hall she had just left. Her footsteps made soft sounds against the polished floor as she headed toward the back area where staff usually gathered during breaks. She needed a moment to breathe, to sit, to understand herself again. Her heart was still beating a little too fast, not from fear this time, but from the rush of doing something she loved. Before she could reach the small staff room, the manager caught up with her. He looked like he had been trying to walk fast while pretending not to run. His expression was a mix of excitement, confusion, and pride. Hey, he said, slightly out of breath. Are you okay? She nodded. Just trying to calm down a little. It was. A lot. A lot is an understatement. He brushed his hand through his hair. I'd never seen anything like that. The whole hall stopped breathing. Even the upper management lady couldn't believe her eyes. She smiled softly, but didn't say anything. The manager opened his mouth to continue, but the woman from upper management approached them quickly. Her presence alone made the manager straighten his posture. May I speak with her privately? The woman asked. The manager nodded immediately. Of course. I'll be nearby if you need anything. When he walked away, the woman turned to her with an expression that seemed both warm and deeply serious. Walk with me, she said gently. They moved down the hallway toward the quieter part of the building. The woman held a calm authority that made people step aside naturally. She seemed like someone who rarely praised anyone, so the softness in her tone surprised the young woman. I want you to know, the woman began, I have worked in this industry for many years. I've seen many musicians perform here, some famous, some upcoming. But what you did today was not ordinary. It wasn't just skill. It was heart. The young woman lowered her gaze, unsure how to respond. Do you know why your playing moved everyone so deeply? The woman asked. She shook her head quietly. Because you played honestly. People can feel the difference between someone who performs and someone who speaks through music. And you spoke to every person in that hall today. Her throat tightened a little, touched by the woman's words. "I'm not trying to pressure you," the woman continued, "but I want to understand something. Did you learn professionally? Have you trained somewhere?" She hesitated. "I learned when I was younger, but life happened, and I had to leave it behind." The woman nodded thoughtfully, as if she expected that answer. "Sometimes life doesn't take music away. It just waits for the right moment to give it back." There was a pause long enough for the woman to study her face carefully. "I want to offer you something," she finally said. Her heart dropped for a second. She wasn't sure if she should feel scared or hopeful. "What kind of offer?" she asked softly. The woman smiled gently. "A new position. Not as a server, not as staff, but as our official pianist for events. A proper role, proper pay, proper schedule. You deserve that much." The young woman's breath caught in her chest. She stared at the woman, unsure if she had heard correctly. "Me? Official pianist?" Her voice cracked slightly. "Yes, you." The woman's tone was firm. "You have a gift, and gifts like yours should not be hidden behind uniforms and schedules that don't let you grow." For a moment, she didn't trust her own emotions. All the years she spent running from her past, all the time she told herself that music belonged to another lifetime, they all came back in a sudden wave. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything now," the woman said kindly. "Take your time. Think about it. But know this opportunities like this don't come often. And when they do, they usually come for a reason." They stopped walking near the end of the corridor. The woman gave her a reassuring look before adding, "When you're ready, come to my office. We'll talk details." With that, she walked away, leaving the young woman standing there. Stunned, her hands trembled again, but this time from disbelief real. Hopeful disbelief. She finally walked to the small staff room and sat on the bench near the lockers. Her mind rushed with 1,000 thoughts. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't imagine stepping into a role so big or being responsible for something like that. She was just a girl who once loved music and lost it along the way, but maybe losing it wasn't the end. Maybe it was only part of the journey. She covered her face with her hands, trying to steady her breath. She felt overwhelmed, but also strangely peaceful. She never thought someone would look at her playing and see potential. She thought those days were gone. After a long moment, she stood up and walked out of the room. The hotel halls felt different now, warmer, welcoming, almost like they were waiting for her next step. As she reached the main lobby again, she saw the manager walking toward her. He held a cup of tea, probably meant for her. "Here, you look like you need this," he said gently. She accepted the cup with a small smile. "Thank you." He watched her for a moment, then asked, "What did she say to you?" The young woman hesitated. "She offered me something. A new role." The manager's eyes widened. "A new role? What kind of role?" "A pianist position," she whispered. The manager nearly dropped his pen. "You're joking." She shook her head. He took a moment to absorb the news. "Wow, that's huge." She nodded, looking down at the cup. "I don't know if I should accept." "Why not?" the manager asked softly. She sighed. "Because everything is happening so fast. And I'm scared. What if I'm not good enough? What if I disappoint them?" The manager leaned against the counter. "Listen, fear is part of big moments. If you weren't scared, it would mean you didn't care. But I've seen you play now. You're not just good, you're remarkable. And whether you realize it or not, you've already changed the way people here look at you." She looked up slowly. "You really think I can do it?" The manager nodded. "I do." She took a deep breath, feeling his words settle inside her. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running from her talent. She felt like maybe, just maybe, she could step into it instead. She left the lobby and walked outside the hotel for some fresh air. The breeze hit her face gently, calming her nerves. People passed by without knowing anything about her. No whispers, no applause, no expectations. Just the normal world moving at its own pace. She closed her eyes for a moment and let her thoughts settle. All her life, music had been the one thing that made her feel alive. Even when she tried to hide it, it kept finding its way back to her. Maybe this offer wasn't a random moment. Maybe it was her second chance. She opened her eyes and looked at the distant street. She knew her answer now. She would step forward. She would return to the world she once loved. She would accept the offer. But tomorrow would come with questions, responsibilities, and new challenges. She wasn't just stepping toward a new job. She was stepping into a new life. And deep inside, she hoped she was finally ready for it. The next morning arrived quietly, with a soft golden light slipping through her curtains. She woke up earlier than usual, even though she had barely slept. Her mind had been full of thoughts all night, memories, fears, hopes, and the weight of the decision she had made. She lay still for a moment, listening to her own breathing and trying to calm the nervous flutter in her chest. Today was the day she would face something completely new. Today was the day she would step into her future. She finally sat up and took a deep breath. She had made her choice the previous night, and even though she was scared, she knew it was the right one. Music had lived inside her all these years, quietly waiting for her. Now she was ready to claim it again. She got ready slowly, taking extra care with her appearance, even though she wasn't required to. Something inside her felt different, now more confident, more awake. She tied her hair neatly, straightened her clothes, and gave herself one last look in the mirror. Her reflection looked the same, yet not the same at all. There was a new light in her eyes. When she arrived at the hotel, the morning was calm. Only a few staff members walked through the hallways, preparing for the day ahead. She felt their eyes on her as she passed, but this time she didn't feel small or embarrassed. She felt strong. She walked toward the upper management office, each step making her heart beat faster. When she reached the door, she paused and took a deep breath. She reminded herself why she was doing this, not for applause, not for attention, but for herself. For the little girl who once dreamed of playing on big stages. For the young woman who lost her way, but never truly lost her passion. She knocked gently. "Come in," a voice called. She opened the door and stepped inside. The woman who had offered her the pianist position was sitting behind the desk, reviewing some papers. When she looked up, her face softened with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came," the woman said. She nodded quietly and sat down when offered a chair. "Did you think about the offer?" the woman asked. Her hands trembled slightly on her lap, but her voice was steady. "Yes, and I want to accept it." A smile slowly spread across the woman's face. "I was hoping you would say that." The young woman felt a wave of relief wash over her, like a long, quiet storm inside her had finally settled. "We'll handle all the paperwork," the woman continued. "Your new role will begin officially next week. But before that, we'd like you to perform at a small event tomorrow evening. It's nothing big, just a private gathering, but it would be a lovely way to introduce you." She swallowed hard. "Tomorrow?" "Yes," the woman said gently. "If that's too soon, we can wait. But I think you're ready." Something inside her whispered yes, even though fear tried to cling to her. She nodded. "I'll do it." The woman clasped her hands together. "Wonderful. I'm proud of you for stepping forward. You deserve this chance." After discussing a few more details, she left the office feeling lighter than she had in years. The air outside felt fresher, warmer. When she walked through the lobby, she noticed the manager standing near the front desk. He saw her and walked over quickly. "So?" he asked eagerly. "What happened?" She smiled. "I accepted the position." The manager's face broke into a genuine grin, one that reached his eyes. "That's great news. I knew you'd do it. Congratulations." She felt her cheeks warm. "Thank you for believing in me." "Of course," he said simply. "Everyone here is proud of you." The rest of the day passed quietly. She helped with small tasks, finished her shift, and even practiced mentally during breaks. She didn't touch the piano that day. She wanted her first performance as the new pianist to feel fresh, full of emotion. When she returned home in the evening, the world outside was calm. She ate a light dinner, then sat by her window and watched the city lights flicker softly. She let her thoughts wander, remembering her childhood lessons, the competitions she once loved, the applause she once earned. She remembered the day she had walked away from it all, thinking she wasn't enough. But now she understood something important. She didn't need to be perfect. She just needed to be honest. The next day arrived quickly. She spent the morning practicing on the small keyboard she kept at home, letting her fingers warm up and her heart settle. She didn't overthink. She just played. Music flowed through her naturally, as if her soul knew exactly what to do. By the afternoon, she felt ready. She arrived at the hotel hours before the event, wanting time to breathe and prepare. The small room where the event was set up wasn't as grand as the ballroom, but it was beautifully arranged with soft lighting and elegant decorations. In the center of the room stood a polished piano, waiting for her. She approached it slowly, her fingers brushing the smooth surface. The touch alone calmed her nerves. She sat down and closed her eyes, letting the quietness wrap around her. People slowly began to enter the room, greeting each other softly. Their voices blended into a gentle background hum. No one noticed her yet, and she was grateful for that. She breathed in deeply and waited for the signal. Finally, the event organizer nodded at her from across the room. She opened her eyes. She placed her fingers on the keys, and she began. The first note flowed out gently, like a soft breeze passing through the room. The conversation around her faded slowly as people turned to listen. Her melody wasn't loud or dramatic. It was warm, heartfelt, and full of quiet strength. Each note she played carried a small piece of her journey, the struggles, the doubt, the hidden dreams, and the courage it took to return. People gathered around the piano slowly, drawn to her music. Their expressions softened, their hearts relaxed. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. As she played, she felt something change inside her. It wasn't fear anymore. It was peace. This wasn't just a performance. This was her way of telling the world who she truly was. She reached the final notes, letting them linger gently in the room before lifting her fingers. The applause came softly at first, then warmed into a genuine, grateful sound. She stood up slowly, humbled by their response. The event organizer approached her with a bright smile. "That was beautiful, truly beautiful." She nodded quietly. "Thank you." As the evening continued, she played a few more pieces, each one filled with emotion. The guests complimented her, and many asked about her background. She answered humbly, grateful for their kindness. When the event finally ended, she stepped outside the room and let out a deep, relieved breath. She had done it. She had taken the first real step into her new life. The manager appeared a moment later, smiling proudly. "I told you, you were meant for this." She laughed softly. "Maybe you were right." He shook his head. "Not maybe. Definitely." As she walked out of the hotel that night, the sky was dark but full of stars. The cool air wrapped around her gently, reminding her how far she had come. She felt a quiet happiness inside her, something she hadn't felt in years. She realized then that life had given her a second chance, a rare, beautiful chance to return to the world she loved. And with every step she took toward home, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She wasn't just a staff member anymore. She wasn't someone hiding her talent. She was a pianist. And this time, she wasn't going to let anything stop her from becoming the person she was always meant to be.